Unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past year, you've probably been hearing a lot of talk about politics. And the talk hasn't just been about who to vote for. From political scientists to journalists, much attention is being focused on how divided and bitter American politics has become. Why is this happening? And more importantly, what can be done to put a bit of politeness back into politics? Here's Katarina with a report.
Let's say you were running for class president. Would it be okay if you called your opponent bad names?
I think calling them bad names, I don't think it really accomplishes anything except just telling other people that you're just going to stoop really low to make other people look bad. But other than that, it's not going to help your chances of winning.
By treating them poorly, it reflects worse on you because it looks like you will stoop to a level so low that you will resort to childish, insult.
I don't think it would be okay for me to call my opponent bad names because if I were to be elected, I would like to be elected for me, not because I'm degrading someone else.
Most of us agree. We've been taught that name calling is bad behavior and that it shouldn't be tolerated. Yet a lot of adults seem to have forgotten that. Politicians call each other ugly names. Political ads say hurtful things about their opponents. Supporters of one candidate have even physically attacked supporters of a rival candidate. Clearly, this is a very upsetting side of our democratic process. What's causing this turn to the dark side? Some say the fault lies with our two-party system. About 100 years ago, the journalist H.L. Mencken wrote, "Under democracy, one party always devotes its chief energies to trying to prove that the other party is unfit to rule." Probably not since the Civil and Vietnam Wars have Americans been so, guess the best word is polarized. In reference to politics, being polarized means to move to opposite extremes, and most experts agree that holding extreme views is not healthy for our democracy. When we return, we'll talk with someone who explains the history of polarization and what we can do about it. Teen Kids News will be right back. One of the biggest problems in politics today is polarization. Joining us is Dustin Lawson. He worked at the White House as a speechwriter, and he's the author of the book, The Logos Party. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How does political polarization hurt the country?
One of my favorite quotes was by President Gerald Ford, who was the president in the 70s, and he said that truth is the glue that holds government together and compromise is the oil that makes government go. And when we get so polarized and so tribal and we get stuck on our teams and we become rivals with each other and see each other who have differences of opinion as enemies, truth and compromise are what help a democracy remain healthy. And those two things get sacrificed when we become so polarized and we care only about our group and our team winning.
Well, speaking of teams, we have a two-party system, and you wrote your book because you felt that the two-party system isn't working. Why isn't it working?
Because it's become so polarized and so us versus them, they're not working together, and a lot of the country is not liking that, and so they're actually losing members of both parties. If the country was 100 people that represented the country as a whole, then 30 of them would be Democrats, 25 Republicans, and the rest would be independents, people who don't belong to a political party. So the biggest group of our country isn't even represented by these two parties. So more and more, but these two parties, they have the power, they make the decisions, but they don't really represent the entirety of the country very well. Maybe never did completely, but really it's getting even worse.
But isn't the two-party system an essential part of our nation's history?
I wouldn't say essential. It's definitely a major part of our nation's history since it's been there almost from the beginning. Not from the beginning, but almost from the beginning. So it's not in the Constitution that we have to have parties, and in fact, I think many of the Founding Fathers would have preferred that we didn't have political parties because they saw the potential negative consequences of what would happen, like what is currently happening, where we just become so us versus them, enemy versus seeing each other as enemies instead of actually working together.
Today we expect the vice president to be from the same party as the president. But it wasn't always that way, was it?
No, definitely not in the beginning. In the beginning, the person who got second place in the presidential race was the vice president. And that was fine for the first 2 terms because no one was going to beat George Washington and no one really ran against George Washington. So the second place person was John Adams. But then during President Washington's administration, the 2 parties were created, one by Thomas Jefferson, one by John Adams, and they became bitter rivals. And so when they ran against each other for the presidency, to be the second president, John Adams won, Thomas Jefferson was second, but since they were such bitter rivals, it didn't work very well. And so the country began to realize maybe the second place person being the vice president isn't such a great idea. And so they created an amendment to the Constitution. Now the president could choose their own vice president. So it almost always was from their own political party. The only time it wasn't was in 1864 when Abraham Lincoln, to try and help bring unity to the country during the Civil War, he, a Republican, chose Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, to be his vice president.
Well, since it's unlikely we'll be ditching the 2-party system, is there a way to have political views without hostility towards those who don't share our views?
Very much so. In my book, I describe the worst type of politics, which is dogma versus dogma, where everyone's closed-minded and we see each other with differences of opinion as enemies. But next to that, I describe what I think is the healthiest type of politics, which is reason with reason, where everybody, to be a person of reason, you care more about truth than your opinion. So that means in case you're wrong, you're willing to admit you could be wrong. You actually want your views to be challenged, and you actually have a mind that's open to being changed. And if we embrace that type of politics more and just our one-on-one dialogue, then it would be a much better situation. Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Differences of opinion lead to inquiry, and inquiry to truth." So intellectual diversity is a good thing. It's one of the best things about our country.
Most of us aren't yet old enough to vote, so what can we do to improve the situation?
Yeah. There's many organizations, like this one organization that I've been working with, and what they do is create debates and other kind of events where they bring Democrats, Republicans, and independents together to have a cordial conversation about particular issues. And teenagers can do this as well in their high school. You might have an organization for Democrats, an organization for high school Republicans, and I recommend having events where you come together and discuss your differences of opinion in a cordial way.
That sounds reasonable. Thanks for speaking with us, Dustin.
Thank you for having me again.
Whatever your political preference, we here at Teen Kids News want to remind you of a very important privilege, the right to vote. Whether you're already 18 or will be one day, here's a great quote to keep in mind. If we don't vote, we are ignoring history and giving away the future. So, if you want to have a say in your future, make voting a habit. For Teen Kids News, I'm Katarina.